Thank you, everyone, for joining this very important discussion during Nova Scotia Human Rights Week. We're here today to understand hate crimes, and we have a wonderful group of people to help guide us through this conversation. My name is Gola Taraski-Carr, and I'm the Director of Race Relations, Equity, and Inclusion with the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. For us and for all Nova Scotians, Human Rights Week is a time to celebrate the power of inclusion, engage across communities, and be inspired by the passion and perseverance of our province's many human rights champions. This year's events include panels and talks featuring dedicated individuals and groups from within the public service, community, and academia, all tackling systemic challenges, difficult topics, and the persistent legacies of colonialism and other forms of oppression, showcasing the potential that each of us has to hold and influence positive change. Before we begin our session, I would like to read a statement from the Commission. This statement is a recognition of our origins as a commission. Today we gather in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation, which is governed by the treaties of peace and friendship. Mi'kmaq have made this land their home from time immemorial, and they are its past, present, and future caretakers. Despite this, the pursuit of colonialism resulted in stolen lands, encroachment on sacred territory, cultural genocide, and oppression that served to advance the lives of settlers at the expense of all Innu people. It is within this context of history that the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission seeks to address persistent, systemic, and institutionalized discrimination resulting from the ideals of white supremacy. The Commission's origins are also rooted in the work of African Nova Scotians who have been present in Mi'kma'ki for more than 400 years. Rooted in the history of slavery and legislated segregation, African Nova Scotians came together, coordinated, and fought against institutionalized racism, discrimination, and oppression, which led to the creation of the Human Rights Commission. As we build upon their work together to address the harms of colonialism, we do so in the spirit of truth and reconciliation, drawing upon the resistance and commitment of our forebearers to guide us in our important work to protect and promote the human rights of Nova Scotians. We recognize the intergenerational impacts of the historic and ongoing injustices against Mi'kmaq and African Nova Scotians and the resulting privileges of those who continue to benefit from these offenses. We honor and embrace Mi'kmaq wisdom such as Msanogama, meaning all of my relations, which values the inherent interconnectivity of all things as we strive to foster relationships based on respect for one another's inherent dignity. I invite you to join in this work with humility and optimism for a better future, Msanogama. And with that, thank you, panel members, for participating in this. I think I will call on Jeff Overmars, who is our background communications point person, to go through a few housekeeping rules before we begin.
Hey, Gola, thank you very much. And just briefly to say that we are lucky to have some ASL interpreters with us today. They are pinned on the screen, but if you as a participant wish to spotlight them, please do so. Likewise, you are able to turn on the captions at the bottom of the screen using the closed captions button. I would also encourage folks to submit questions via the Q&A box at any point through the discussion. We will allot some time at the end to take some questions from viewers. Without further ado, Gola, just back to you.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So a little bit of an introduction to the topic that we'll be exploring today. Earlier this year, Statistics Canada reported the total number of hate crimes in Canada has more than doubled from 2019 to 2024. Halifax ranks 5th in the country for its hate crime rate, reporting 121 hate crimes last year, an increase of 62% over the previous year. Halifax Regional Police, HRP, attributes this increase in reported crimes to the establishment of a dedicated hate crimes unit, as well as higher reporting and increasing public awareness. Crimes motivated by race, religion, and sexual orientation were the most common police-reported hate crimes, according to HRP in 2023. Changing demographics, divisive public discourse, and far-right views contribute to concerns that this trend will continue. It is important that all Nova Scotians understand what a hate crime is and what they can do about them. Now, with that, I have the pleasure of introducing our panel members. We begin first with Dr. Isaac Saney. Welcome, Isaac. Isaac is Black Studies and a Cuba specialist and the coordinator of the Black and African Diaspora Studies program at Dalhousie University. He is also a non-practicing lawyer. Dr. Saney had his own experience with a hate crime, and that will form part of his sharing today. Thank you, Isaac. We are also joined by Craig Upshaw, retired detective constable with Halifax Regional Police. Craig was the first full-time hate crime investigator in Atlantic Canada. Welcome, Craig. We are also joined by Jeff Potier, Halifax Regional Police Hate Crimes Unit. Thank you, Jeff. And also Sharon Goodwin, Crown Attorney for the counties of Lunenburg and Queens. It's also important for us to note that Sharon was not the Crown Attorney in Dr. Saney's case, and she will also not be discussing details of any past or current cases. So with that, we turn to you, Dr. Saney, Isaac, with our first question. In 2018, you experienced an incident of racially motivated violence. Can you share how this experience impacted you? And can you also share the process of navigating the criminal justice system afterwards?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you for having me be part of this distinguished panel to talk about something that I think is increasingly important, given the rise of anti-immigrant and racist violence across Canada. The first point I'd like to say is that this is also a poignant anniversary. Today is actually the 5th anniversary to the day that the sentencing took place of the person who was responsible to the attack, a racist attack that took place against my daughter, Asha, who was then only 4 months old, and myself on the Halifax Transit. The sentencing took place actually on Wednesday, December the 4th, 2019, and here we are on a Wednesday, December 4th, 2024. So the event itself, it got a lot of coverage in the media. Precisely because of a group of people who were extremely concerned about this and sort of give people a quick redux of what had happened. I was on paternity leave from Dalhousie University, had my daughter late in life. And then in October, I decided I was going to take her on a trip downtown. And as I was about to catch a bus, because it was kind of becoming drizzly, I decided to catch a bus from Spring Garden Road, and I was dropping stuff off at Scotia Square at the Blue Cross when you could actually do stuff physically. And I was dropping stuff off at Blue Cross, and I like to engage in person with someone. And so I decided to get on the bus at the stop near the Shoppers Drug Mart on Spring Garden Road. At the time, there was myself and there was another couple of color who were there trying to get on the bus with their child. There were 2 people who were able-bodied, a young woman and a son who was well over 6 feet, who decided that they should board first, pushed aside the first couple, and myself jumped on the bus, right? And then got on the bus, and then we both basically in this alcoves, you can pull up the seats, put our children there. They then began to utter a whole series of racist and anti-immigrant comments. And I told them at the time, I don't appreciate you saying those things and you should desist. Perhaps I would do things differently now, given what had happened, because you got to think of the context you're in. And then they began to scream at me, threatened with violence, shook my daughter's stroller. And in the process of doing this, it became so frightening for me and for people on the bus that people on the bus, to their credit, intervened. The bus driver pulled the bus up, the bus to the side of the road just before it hit Barrington Street, kicked them off. And this is part of the story that many people don't know. He eventually, the next day, resigned from Halifax Transit because he had witnessed so many instances of this on the bus. I mean, eventually, because people have to obviously make a living in the society, rejoined the Halifax Transit. We did. We then went up and stopped at Scotia Square, and I guess they must have figured the people who were engaged in the bus, when they got off, they hit the bus, they cursed, screamed, and all that sort of stuff. They must have realized I was going to go to Scotia Square. They hung in wait there for me, and what happened is they got off the bus and were threatening, and they were on the other side of the street, what they were going to do to me, what they were going to do to my daughter, and I was terrified, and at this point, I was having an out-of-body experience, incredibly surreal. So this is where it gets interesting with the interaction from the police, right? Okay. At the time, I decided, well, I must call the police, right? So I called 911, and there happened to be a police cruiser parked out on the Duke entrance of Scotia Square. So an officer was in there doing something. So he responded to the call, came across, spoke to them, then came to the people who were involved in the uttering of threats and assault and all this sort of stuff. And then he came to talk to me, and he was incredibly nonchalant about it, right? Didn't even give me a file number after taking my statement, right? And so on. Eventually, later that afternoon, that evening, and my daughter had slept through the whole thing, right? And eventually, what had happened was I then posted something on Facebook. I had to get this off my chest. It was necessary to vent, and I needed to have some sort of cathartic moment. So there were two responses. One was overwhelming response from people in the community, particularly Halifax Equity Watch and other people in the African Nova Scotian community, who came to my support, but also said we must address this collectively, right? That's another issue. At the same time, the same police officer, and this is why I've often raised this point, that one of the interesting things about my case is from the nonchalant, cavalier approach and trivialization of the officer, it suddenly became one where he began communicating to me on Facebook saying, Dr. Saney. So obviously he must have Googled me, because I'd actually given him my card from Dalhousie University. So eventually I ended up being given differential and deferential treatment because of a particular position I have in society. I'm somewhat well known as a spokesperson, as an activist, as an intellectual, as a scholar. And so within this, and I spoke with a friend I knew in the police force. I said, this is unprofessional, unacceptable behavior. And they switched another officer who began to look into this. And so what happened is then I began to have a very good relationship with the Halifax Regional Police, as well as with the Crown Attorney, who sat down and met with me, right? But what really drove this forward was a press conference we had with Halifax Equity Watch, where we brought forth other people who had suffered from these kind of incidents on the bus. The fact that the victim in this case, in my case, was a 4-month-old baby, really made this incredibly egregious and gave it a significant amount of publicity and so forth. Now, the cause of this was that eventually the attack took place on October 25th, 2018, and it was not until December 4, 2019 that this was finally resolved. The person received a 30-day sentence, 30 days of house arrest, 30 days of curfew, and then 18-month probation, and then there was a cease and desist order from actually engaging with me. And through that whole process, it was two things that really stood out. One was the amount of times they could postpone it, and so lengthening how many times they had to come into the court and have to relive this experience and so forth. And I'm a person who don't drive. I've owned 3 cars, but I've never had a license, never driven. My wife does all the driving. And so I use public transit. And I always enjoy public transit because I like to engage with people. I like to observe people, and I find it comforting. And this, for a very long time, made it very uncomfortable for me to take public transit, right? So I had to relive this particular experience time and time again, right? So that was the one thing, and until it was resolved on December 4, 2019. But also within this case was the difficulty of having this classified as a hate crime, because I'm sure, as Ms. Goodwin will point out, the Crown will point out, it's a very high bar, right? And then the Attorney General has to be the one to authorize a hate crime, right? So one of the biggest problems was actually getting this recognized as a specific form of egregious criminal act in terms of being a hate crime. They jostled my baby's stroller, but more importantly, they altered what was clearly racially motivated, right? Insults and attacks and so forth, which I thought clearly put it under the rubric of a hate crime, right? But it's extremely difficult to establish that within the Canadian law. The bar is so high, and then you have to have the political intervention of what I would call of the Attorney General. I made the case, and I tried to make the case given the egregious nature, what they had said, the video that was available on the bus, the fact that there was a 4-month-old baby involved, that this was a hate crime, and that it was in the public good to actually have this prosecuted as a hate crime, given the rise of these kind of acts that were taking place within Canada, and we see increasing, right? Okay, and that this would be a very important public statement and so on. It was not made as a hate crime, and I also think, under the, there is an international convention for the elimination of all forms of discrimination that was from 1965, came into force in 1966. There's also the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights that, from 65, if I remember correctly, comes into force in 76, that clearly establish, right, prohibitions, right, and against these kinds of acts, condemning them and so forth. So I think there's also obligations under international law that Canada can deploy, right, to deal with these particular acts, right? So that's where it stood, right? And then with Halifax Equity Watch, we then, because we were focusing on Halifax Transit, we began to get Halifax Transit and we played a significant role, and I have to give credit to people such as Larry Haven, Judy Haven, as well as Connor Smithers, right, who did a tremendous amount of work as we propelled Halifax Transit to launch an anti-racist campaign to deal with the number of acts that were taking place within that very important space for people of color, for immigrants, and particularly working people and so forth. So that's where we stand, and I stand aghast at the number of hate crimes that have increased in Canada. I stand aghast at the fact that we now have a discourse that's emerged that's very anti-immigrant within Canada. I see signs going up, I see graffitis going up, and this will only enable those who feel that they are now given, shall we say, license, right, given what has happened recently politically to the south of us and what's happening across the world, to actually engage in these egregious, unacceptable, and reprehensible acts, right? So I think it's important to do that. The last point I'd like to say as well is we also have to recognize that Canada has a historical context for this. Canada has a history, obviously, of colonialism, right? Of residential schools, of slavery, of segregation. The first recorded race riot in North American history took place in Shelburne in 1784, July 25th, July 26th in 1784 in Shelburne, right? There's a history, for example, of Keep Canada White immigration policies, going back to John A. Macdonald, Mackenzie King, Wilfrid Laurier, and all of these people who declared that Canada was going to be a white Anglo-Saxon country, right? And those people who were allowed in they're allowed in simply to have their labor exploited and not to be recognized as citizens. And I teach a course, Introduction to African Canadian Studies, where I spend a lot of time talking about this and so forth. So we have to look both at the historical enablers, the historical conditions that have led to this, right, of Canada as a colonial settler state, but also, secondly, to look at forces that are now organizing within Canada. As a young student, I remember dealing with white Aryan resistance when I was, and people chasing us down. I remember also the Ku Klux Klan. This was before I was going to school here, before my time, trying to organize a chapter in Nova Scotia. I think Leonard Pace was then the Attorney General of Nova Scotia, trying to organize a chapter in the early 1983, and Nova Scotians signing in mass a petition against that. Right? So I think we have to be very aware of this history, very aware of current forces being organized, and very well, quite often, and I hate to say this, political parties in Canada and the state sort of enables this kind of public discourse, either openly through certain things that are said, but also through certain policy practices, right? So, for example, I'm at Dalhousie University, and we see international students, for example, and immigrants being blamed for the increase in rents and the cost of living, right? Okay, which is all completely beyond their control, but that creates and engenders an anti-immigrant and quite often an shall we say, people of color, anti-Black, okay, anti-Asian kind of discourse, which then can translate into very dangerous actions, right? And so on. So I'll stop there. And I'd like to say that last point I'd like to make on this is my daughter slept through the entire incident, didn't wake up until I was at a bakery, L&F bakery, to enjoy some pastries. And then she woke up and then needed to be changed. She was only 4 months at the time. And she remains an extremely happy, engaged, young girl of 6 years old who has my sense of humor, unfortunately.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Thank you for sharing your vulnerability in sharing this with us, and also your courage in coming forward. One thing that I am struck by is you particularly noting that maybe your positionality or privilege afforded you a good level of experience or follow-up. And I often think about the divisive rhetoric that's occurring now in the political landscape, and those with less power and less privilege, and are they being afforded the same support. Thank you so much. I also want to just acknowledge it's always difficult when we go back into our past and share something. That was hard. Glad to hear that your daughter slept through it. Thank goodness. I can't imagine what I would have done in your situation with my children. Thank you so much.
I'd just like to add, I know you've got to go on to someone else, that when the Crown at that time was Jennifer Crew, looked at the video, she told me that she was appalled by what she witnessed, right? Okay. And it was very clear and it was terrifying, right? In that sense. But one of the things we wanted to say, well, get back to my positionality, was, and this was a position of our Halifax Equity Watch Group that we're dealing with, was that everybody should be treated the same way under the law, with respect, with equity, right, and equality. And it shouldn't depend on whether one is a professor at the university or not, right, in order to get that kind of, shall we say, special treatment.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Thank you. And now we ask you, Craig Upshaw, in response to Dr. Saney's advocacy, as well as other high-profile hate crimes at the time in Nova Scotia, the HRP was led to create the Hate Crimes Unit. Can you tell us a little bit about the process of creating this unit, the training involved, etc.? What was it like at the time, and what were you thinking about as you went down this road?
Well, I will start by certainly acknowledging Dr. Saney in regards to the trauma that he endured during this time. This is something that some of us have dealt with our entire lives. It's a certain traumatic impact. And people don't realize that there's still places that we can't go. There's still places that we're uncomfortable of going, even if we can go there. That if I close my mouth and say nothing, I'm still a target because of my skin color, and in some cases, somebody else's religion or how they look. This is an ongoing issue here, and it's time that we address that. So when I look at hate attacks the core of who we are and what we stand for. It dehumanizes, it vilifies people. It tears at the fiber of our communities. People are living in fear in Canada. People don't want to go outside their houses. Canada stands for peace and freedom, but it's not so peaceful and so freedom. There's so much freedom involved for other people. So the pain that people are feeling is real. It's real. Their fear is real. Their pain is my pain and our failure. So to finally get to this stage where we've taken this that serious, and it was because of Dr. Saney, it was because of Mr. Dunna, who was also targeted as a tax. If it wasn't for Mr. Dunna's daughter posting this video and bringing the attention to it, we certainly would never have gotten there. So at that time, I was working in diversity office, and I was approached by Chief Constable at the time. He says, "Craig, given your history with the police agency and your experience, would you look at creating the hate crime unit?" You know, if it wasn't for the attention bought, this wouldn't be the forward way of thinking. I mean, we're looking at 2021. We've dealt with this for how long? 2021, we're trying to catch up. So obviously that was something I've taken on. So myself, Joanne Smith, Jeff Pache, and Mitt Pearsram. It was overseen by Superintendent Dave Boone, as well as Chief Constable himself. We embarked on this journey, and the journey took us to OPC, which is the Ontario Police College, where we started getting hate training. Started traveling to Ontario, where as big as Canada is and as small as it is at the same time, we walked into Ontario where we have hate experts. They open their doors. They shut down their units. They sit there and answer every question we want numerous times. We spend a ton of time in Ontario learning from Ontario Police, York Police, Ottawa Police, Toronto Police Service, PO Regional. So we took what was working, what wasn't working, where our focus is here. Because when you look at Ontario, they had so much of a diverse population. They were dealing with hate well in advance of Nova Scotia or Atlantic Canada. So where better to learn? Sitting there, talking face-to-face, hands-on training. So then we took that information, we come back, we started having meetings. And one of the things for me coming from the diversity office, and also with my own lived experience, how do we take Ontario information and rip it apart, to rebuild it to fit Atlantic Canada and Nova Scotia, because there is a difference. There's a difference in our cultures and our communities sometimes, and we need to make sure it works here. So we sit down and we started looking at building a unit. What is the best thing? So first and foremost for me is that we wanted to build a unit that was based on community. Community, there's nothing for us without us is the biggest thing people are saying. So you need to get into the communities. I come from the diversity office. I had great relationships with all of our communities. I was not afraid to step outside the box and say, hey, I don't understand this. Can you teach me? And believe me, all of them stepped up to the plate to teach me to understand the communities. If I said something wrong, they told me. I was open enough to say, yep, you know what? You're right, and I apologize. It's that simple. So now we're building with the community in mind. The community the reassurance piece of the hate crime unit is as big as the file. How we leave those communities when we leave, when we walk out of there, is huge. So now we had to look at hate crime. So we got the hate crimes that we had to understand fully. And then we had to say, okay, what are our issues? We have an untrained police force. How do we address that? So we got together, and myself, Jeff, Joanne, and we built a training program, and we delivered it. We trained about 650 members. How do you deal with hate? How do we deal with our communities? So first, you're looking at a group of people that have a ton of bias. How do you eliminate that bias? So you need to focus on the evidence of the file all the way through. That's how we were teaching our members. You follow the trail of evidence. And when you get past the evidence, allow those community impact statements and the victim impact statements to bring that emotion back into the court. One of the other issues that we had with the community was with our members was the context of the files. Without the context of the files, you're not going to capture what we need to capture. We need to understand what was happening. We need to understand how this affected this person, how it would make them feel. And when you're not understanding the emotion and how you're feeling, we can't capture that and introduce it to, our crowds like Sharon. We can't say, because they weren't there in that call. We need to make sure we paint the best picture we can, and we're capturing that emotion from our person that was victimized. So that was something we actually focused on. For me, the reassurance piece was so huge. How do we leave that community when we walk away? How do we make that community feel that they received a service, that we actually cared, that we showed empathy? This was huge when we step into that house. We were there from anywhere from 1 to 4 hours. Sometimes you couldn't do anything. You're walking in, you see the pain, you feel the hurt. The family saying, I want to go back to a war-torn country because I feel safer there than I do in Canada. That's a problem. 4 hours later, I'm walking out. That family has a smile on their face. And I still couldn't do anything other than provide that reassurance and that support that they required. And now they know that we provided that voice. We listened, not only listened, but we heard what they said. And that now my job is to make sure that you have all the services. So we also trained our victim services people. We trained everybody from the first time you step into the HRP or make that phone call, that person has been trained. Anybody that was public facing got trained. And that was supported by Dan Casella, and now obviously pushed by the new chief, Donnie McLean. This was where we went. The other thing, when you're trying to build a unit, you have to have a response time. The response time for me was within 72 hours, because we got to take into account, and people don't realize this sometimes, police are human as well, that they have times off. They have families. So when you say 72 hours, well, your day's off, well, I can't make that call. I can't be there, but I'm there within the 72 hours. And the first thing I need to do is look through these files and say, okay, I need to reach out to this person, reach out to this person. For me, when the unit was formed, it wasn't reaching out by phone. The phone is impersonal. The only way we reach out by phone is if we have no choice. We reach out by phone at that point. And that was just a call to say, you know what? I want to make sure you're okay. I received the file. I'm going through it, but I would like to meet with you here soon. And I'd set that date. And so I may have to make a phone call because all of a sudden you get an explosion of files that I've got to get there because I still need to be there in person. So most of the people that were victimized understood. that I couldn't be there at that moment, but I was coming within the next day because you're important to me and I need to hear your story and I need to understand the pain you're feeling and how we can best serve you. To build that kind of respect from the community was important. I mean, sometimes that means that you eat some food that you're not familiar with, drink some coffee, drink some tea. You've got to do it. So we're teaching our members that as well. Take the few minutes. When you're in the community, you can't be seen as that police officer that the police officer with no legs. All they see is your top body driving by. You need to get in the community when there's no problems. When you're not going to take mom or dad away or remove the kids, you're going in when things are good to say, hey, how you doing? I just popped by to see you, just to say hi. Because now the community gets used to seeing you. And that's when you start building that bridge. Because if we don't fill that gap, we're not going to have that relationship we want. We cannot always go to the community and say, I need this, I want this, and I did this for you. The climate has changed. You're building a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You're not telling the community, I'm doing this. How do we work together to get here? What are the problems? How can I help? We need the community for everything that we're doing. So when we built the hate crime unit, that's exactly what we did. So when you have the hate crime unit, and I'm not going to go much into it because I know Detective Constable Jeff Potts is going to talk about how the files move through. But we also had to create a way that we didn't miss anything. So when we did the hate crimes, hate incidents, and you had suspected hate. So if our members are in a spot where they didn't understand the file and they thought it might have been suspected hate or not, it got flagged. And when it got flagged, it come to one of us to have the view to say it's a hate incident for this reason, or it's a hate crime, or it doesn't meet that qualification. We turn it to mischief or whatever it may be. So Joanne Smith, she had to do a lot of work because she was also monitoring that to make sure that we never missed any of the files that should have been reported. That got notified to our unit at that point, and we made the call where it fit in. So we started putting fail safes in place. The other thing we had to look at is how do we track what's going on? So we had to make sure we track hate crime, hate incident, and suspected hate. So when you say the numbers are 100, whatever, in 2016 or 2020, 16 calls, 16 files. We launched the end of 2021, 248 files. 2023, we bypassed 248 files when I left, and I'll leave Jeff to talk about how many numbers he's looking at. Mm-hmm. Halifax has actually been tracking the numbers properly, and they talk about us across Canada. We're well known for this creation of this unit and how we created it. We received the CAO Award of Excellence. We were recognized across Canada. We're part of Alberta HICIT, which is extremist investigative team, as well as the Ontario investigative team. We sit on the Canadian Race Relations Federation, and I was the chair for the reassurance piece, how we build that, how we start forming Canada to face this stuff. We've also branched out since I've left. I've trained other police agencies, and we got 2 other sessions booked up. And because of the relationship I have with Halifax, they also allow Jeff to attend with me to make sure that we have somebody that's still in the police world that they can go to for that advice. So we still work a lot together, and we still focus on growing the unit. We were the only hate crime unit in Atlantic Canada. There's a lot of issues going on. There's a certain increase. The increase of hate crime is because we are tracking it. The numbers spiked. At some point, it's going to level off, and it's going to be our true numbers. But when you do increase the numbers of immigrants coming in, well, you know what? Your numbers do go up because the population is increasing. So we got to look at some real numbers, and eventually we will get to the real numbers. But it'll take some time to get there. There has been an increase, LGBTQ2SIA. What happens in the world happens here. When you're looking at the Gaza Strait, we are dealing with that here. People are hurting on both sides. It's not for me to talk about the political side. What it's talking about that you're in Canada, a place of unity, that you're supposed to feel safe. So we have to be prepared to say, this is happening in the world. How do we deal with that here? So, we meet with a lot of people at the same time. Russia, Ukraine, same type of thing. This is also ongoing. So we got to pay attention to the world events, and we got to be ahead of that curve moving forward. So we're there. When we looked at when we looked at the training side of things, and I did write some notes because I don't want to forget everything there. One of the other issues that we ran into was the restorative process. When we build our systems, we build them systemically built. What we need to do is we need to start stripping them down, start rebuilding these things, and make sure that hate wasn't investigated at this level at this time. So our restorative process may not work in this case. So we got to start working with our communities and have the community involved with what we're doing to build a program that we can say, hey, you know what? We're coming forward. We're coming forward, and are you interested in helping here so we can build this program so we can start putting our people through there and they're actually getting a true lesson that needs to be taught. Public engagements are ongoing. I know Jeff's been doing quite a few, so the educational piece is what we need to get out there as well. All our police agencies need to be trained. Hate campaigns should be done so everybody can go. If I'm experiencing hate on any website, say this is what you do to want more information. What is hate? What is a hate incident? This needs to be put on all the municipalities. It needs to be a public hate campaign so people know that we're there and that we care. The employees of all the agencies dealing with public needs to understand that they require the training as well. Hate and racism is tearing us apart.
Mhm.
We need to know that sometimes our vocabulary goes with that. And so with the hate, your vocabulary increases the trauma, which escalates a lot of the problem that we're having. So we need to know what we're speaking about when we're dealing with our people. And it's not just one type of people, it's everybody. We need to be finding the humanity side. And we need to spend the time in our community identifying our community partnerships and know what we each offer so that we can start building our future of where we're going, that we want to stay in the forefront, and that we're sitting there setting the example of what we want to see. This is a topic that we certainly could speak a lot more about, and I could go on and on and on. But given the amount of files that we dealt, the lived
Yes.
experience, the diversity background, all the training we had, but the research and lived experience was the biggest thing I pulled on when I was looking at building it. And Jeff has taken over this role in that
Yes.
unit, and it's continuing on the work. So I'll stop there, allow Jeff to step in to take over
Thank
that
you.
and talk about how the
Thank you.
files are built.
Thank you, Craig. That was very, very helpful for me. And before we move on to Jeff, I just wanted to, what I'm hearing is that what you're describing is a different approach by police to hate. And it sounds like in addition to all of the, building up and protecting a trail of evidence that has to be done, you're really emphasizing, and you're having a deeper ask of officers, which is to examine their own biases, to examine their own lens and their own cultures, and really spend time making the relationship and centering the relationship with communities so that that trust and that sense of well-being and reassurance can be established. It is, to me, a wonderful trauma-informed approach, but it is a deeper ask to officers than perhaps we're used to them practicing because of time and resources, etc. You also point to systemic questions about the system and how it was built. Any thoughts on that? So when the rubber meets the road and you're actually training, what you sound like you're describing is a cultural shift here.
We already got a cultural shift out there. When we become police officers, we're sworn serve and protect. When we're sworn to serve and protect, sometimes that climate changes. The community demands something different. They demand police officers to be better. So our training has changed. Our thought process and the direction we're going is changing. It's more community-based policing versus where we go with the take over a situation. Now it's a conversation. It's trying to be more proactive than reactive in policing. It's proactive to the point where I know what the issues are because I got my thumb on the heartbeat of the community and I'm starting to understand the issues. How do we support you to fix this? Don't take it over. How do we work together to fix this? This is where we go. So when police officers step into that, they've got to understand not only for the responsibility that they've taken on, but for the amount of money that they do get paid. This is part of you. You need to be able to change. You're there to serve, not hurt. You're there to protect, not cause the trauma. This is how the society has forced us to actually change, and it's a better change and where we need to be. So we are moving forward to that. And it's not very often you're going to have somebody say, look, our system is broken. Let's rip that down. Nobody wants to say, yeah, the system's broke. Let's rip. That's a lot of work. But at some point, we need to start revisiting our policies and our procedures to make sure they are aligned with the new climate that we're in. And I know it's a huge ask,
Yes.
but at some point, 2024, we're still dealing with this. At some point, somebody's going to have to take that step and say, it's time for us to start breaking this apart and building it up so that we start seeing everybody equal. You know, when we talk about diversity, it's not just about the color of your skin, it's about putting all your minds together and coming up with that idea. And so many times they just focus on the color of your skin. How do we be more inclusive? How do we become more welcoming? When I walk into a place and nobody looks like me, we need to start increasing that. If we got someone that speaks 4 or 5 languages, there's people out there that do that. Let's offer that service. Let's make sure that we say, oh, you know what? I got somebody here that can explain. We can't forget about our seniors nor our youth. We need voices for all of these people. So when we start building our equity committees, there's a spot for them that we need to hear that voice. And the seniors can't be forgot about because they made a ton of sacrifice. So when I look at that, I think there's a lot of change. And we have even some of our new police officers are coming in with a different mind. We're looking at trying to be a diverse police agency, which is great. But we also got to make sure that they're supported inside, that they have every opportunity as everybody else inside, that they can grow and get to those positions of power where they can make the change. Right now, Halifax is sitting at a great spot to do a lot of things. You know, you do have Donnie McLean, first Black police chief. You know, you have Dean Simmons, the deputy chief, is in the area. Andrew Matthews. When you're looking at the people that are in place, this is the time for change. And I mean, that's certainly something I can't get into fully, but that is time for change. So it'd be interesting to see where we're going because I know there's movement and I know that Chief McLean actually supports this unit wholeheartedly, so I can see it moving.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Craig. Pleasure to understand it and the history. Thank you. Jeff, Detective Constable Jeff Potier. So when someone thinks they have been a victim of a hate crime, what can they expect? Kind of walk us through the process. What would the average person expect in terms of their engagement with the police?
So I think the first thing that would be beneficial to talk about would be when we were creating the unit, we had to redefine a couple of the things that we were going to investigate. We were going to investigate hate crimes and hate incidents, and Craig was instrumental with the rest of us in coming up with these definitions that we were going to use and abide by. So in the process of creating these definitions, one thing that we did as well is we had to create new offense types for when people called in, so they weren't getting lumped into something that didn't capture what it was. So we've created hate incident call types and various other hate motivated offense call types. But with the two, we have criminal and non-criminal offenses that we investigate with regard to hate. We have hate crime and hate incident. So I'll just read the definition that we use for hate crime. So it's a criminal offense committed against a person or property that is motivated, whole or in part, by the suspect's hate, bias, or prejudice based on the victim's real or perceived ancestry, race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, creed, sex, age, mental or physical disability, gender identity or expression, or sexual orientation, or any other similar factor. So if, just to quickly break it down, for what we would, if you feel like you've been the victim of a crime and you feel to hate, to break this statement down as to see if it fits would be, you've been the victim of any kind of crime at all under the criminal code: assault, threats, harassment, anything from right up to homicide. And it's committed against a person or property, so towards yourself or towards a building or a car or anything, motivated whole or in part. So what we don't, it doesn't have to be the sole driving issue. You don't need to have somebody come in right off the beginning with racism. Racism can show up later on in the call, later on in the incident, directed towards the victim. So if it's not the leading force, we need people to realize that you still may be the victim of a hate crime. And it's motivated whole or in part by the suspect's hate, bias, or prejudice based on the victim's real or perceived. And then what we have is our working group that we took right out of the criminal code from section 318.4 of the criminal code. And realistically, it lists a lot of characteristics in there. And I find everybody we talk to can fall into one or many of those categories. So what I usually tell people is, if you think that your experience fits that definition, or if you're on the, you're back and forth, you don't know, I ask you to call, place a complaint with the police. Let us have a look at it and let us determine if we can, what avenue we can deal with it. If it's a criminal offense that we can say is or is not a hate motivated crime, or what that might look like for our response. The other one would be a non-criminal incident, which would be we just have as a hate incident. So it's fairly close. It's behaviors that are motivated by hate, bias, or prejudice against the victim's real or perceived, and then our working group of characteristics that are not criminal acts. So that particular incident would be if you are standing in a fast food restaurant lineup and the person next to you doesn't like something about you, and they look at you and they tell you, go back to your country, or you don't belong here, or something like that. We would look at that as a hate incident. And we ask you if you're willing to call and report those. Call the non-emergency number if you're safe. Call 911 if you're not in a safe place and you're in physical jeopardy of being harmed. And let us have a look at it. You're providing us with information. If you can provide us with the who, that's great, but you're going to give us the where, the when, and the what was said towards you. And usually I tell people with hate incidents, if the community isn't reaching out to the police force to tell us what's happening, because we can't be everywhere, this is good information to have. It's information to reflect the community we live in and to see what we need to do to maybe redeploy police resources if we see trends occurring and so on. The other side of things is hate incidents. People who commit hate incidents will sometimes move on to commit hate crimes or even more. So it's also good to show trends with certain people as they move through, if they on their own choosing decide to move through the criminal justice system. So what I would say to people who feel that they have a report of a hate crime or hate incident would be, if you're safe. So let's say it happened to you. Let's say it happened to you maybe on the bus, and now you're home and you're safe. Call the non-emergency phone number. Call 902-490-5020 and file your complaint with the police, or whatever jurisdiction you're in with the RCMP or any of the other municipal police agencies. File your complaint if you're in danger in the moment, or you're at risk of physical harm, or you're scared and you don't know what to do. You can always call 911 and we will come to you. What you're going to get in the beginning through the non-emergency phone number or through 911 is you're going to get a uniformed police response. You're going to get an officer that's going to come to you or call you or meet up with you in some way. I'm speaking from our perspective at HRP. I can't comment on the other municipal agencies of the RCMP, but from our response, you're going to get a uniformed police officer who will work with you, and they're going to investigate the crime. So let's talk about hate crime, not incident. If you've been the victim of a crime, the officer will investigate the crime and move the file through with regard to the criminal offense that was committed. What the officer will then do is send a notification to the hate crime unit for myself to come follow up with the victim and to provide the support and investigate the hate side of it. And sometimes that means taking a victim-centric report, like a statement, a follow-up statement from that victim, which kind of can sometimes reflect a victim impact statement in the court process. But it's to capture the things that weren't captured from when the initial officer responded to the incident, because the officer responding to the incident is there to investigate, like, let's say the assault. If it's an assault file, they're there to get the let's get the identification, let's get what happened, the where, the when, and I'm coming behind with the why. And I'm trying to get the follow-up information to get it to the Crown Attorney so that we can have hate captured in the file. These types of offenses, these ones where we're looking at harassment, threats, assault, all of those, they're going to be hate motivated offenses that are going to come through as a sentencing factor. So you won't really see it on the front end, but everything I'm providing, like Sharon and I are in different jurisdictions, but if she was my Crown, this is stuff that I would provide to her to bring in as a sentencing for a sentencing factor to get the hate addressed within the file. As in the moment with what we have available to us, this is how we do it. So our goal is, as Craig said, to have a quick 72-hour response. This is why at the moment we don't have online reporting. There's other jurisdictions in Canada that currently have online reporting for hate investigations, but we're a fairly new unit, and we're building towards that, and it will come in time. But at the moment, we have the non-emergency phone number, or 911 is how you would report the incident.
Thank you, Jeff. This is very fascinating. The distinction between a hate incident and a hate crime. I think that's something that I think members of the public, myself included, we need to know this. We need to know that languages, behaviors in the most everyday setting, as you described, the fast food line, the levels of aggression and the statements, go back to your country. It's something that is just so part of life that many people, myself included, and my children, you just blow it off and you think that there is no recourse for it. And then you have that additional trauma and shame that this has happened to you. And how do you raise it? It's so good to know that that support is there, to have it, at least the data collected, have your story recorded, and have that sense of attention and support from the police. That's very new for me. And I think a lot of people would appreciate that.
Yeah, so if I can just follow up for a second. So we will work to our best to provide the support on the back end, and it's not there's nothing set in stone as to how we do that. We have a lot of other groups and agencies that have popped up in the city over the last few years that we work with. But one thing I wanted to emphasize is like, because like yourself and Craig, have mentioned that sometimes this is a daily occurrence for people, and sometimes it does get brushed off. And when we brush things off, we don't really focus on what's important for the police investigation. So when people are reporting things, one of the things we're looking for is like specific sentences or statements or words that were said, to really focus in on what was being said to the victim, along with the emotional side of it, because anger carries that tells a lot, right? So if somebody's calm is different than if somebody's like really angry and screaming, right? It shows the intent is there. So when I call people, this is another reason for trying to get the people as soon as we can after the fact, because it's a little more fresh if it's recent.
Yes. And I guess that's the challenge. Sometimes it takes people time to process what has happened, and navigating your emotions and feeling safe and asking those questions. Should I, shouldn't I just want to put my head down and pretend it didn't happen and move on with my life. But the importance of us providing that information so you can see the data and understand. And what really struck me is that the escalation from verbal behaviors into physical acts, potentially, and crimes. So you would do your police thing and totally keep an eye on suspects and people in the community, I guess. It helps you with keeping us all safe.
Yeah, having a dedicated hate crime unit is beneficial in a lot of ways. It does allow us to keep records of hate motivated crimes, keep records of who's committing these crimes and offenses, and it provides us with a lot more information for us and to deliver to the Crown Attorney for past behaviors if they are hate motivated offenses. The other thing I want to mention too is something you said that kind of triggered it was this is a very traumatic event for a lot of people, a lot of situations, and sometimes you don't want to come down to the police station. And sometimes you don't want that uniformed officer showing up at your door. So if that's the case and you want to, with us, if you want to provide information or you want to talk to an officer about a hate crime, you can ask just to have somebody not show up at your door. I want to talk on the phone. And then when it gets to me, I can come meet you anywhere. We don't have to meet at the police station. We don't have to meet at your house. We could meet anywhere that you want to meet where you feel comfortable talking about things. And I don't show up in uniform. I show up in a plainclothes capacity as not, and it's a little bit more relaxing, because if you want to meet at a coffee shop, we can, and we can talk about what happened. Some people just want to deliver information and they feel more comfortable doing it in an environment of their choosing it. And that's okay too.
That's amazing. And it makes me think about members from newcomer communities, to just the fear of being involved with the police or calling the police or seeing somebody in uniform. That would help to reassure them that you're reaching them in their comfort and in their way. It's something that I think folks need to know, that they can ask for that as well. Thank you so much, Jeff. Any final thoughts on anything else you'd like to share? We'll have some open conversation later, but
Craig and I deliver this as a package to officers over a day or two, and so we could talk a lot about a lot of things. This is what I've talked about is what will affect the majority of the public with the response to hate crimes and hate incidents. Yes. So I won't go into all the other things because this is primarily it. The one final thought I will say is I usually tell people, if it's important to you, it's important to us. So please call and let us know. And if you're not really sure, but you're on the fence, call. Just call, file the complaint. We can always take your information and we can conclude the file after we talk on the phone. Or if you don't want to be involved with the police officer, you can always forward the information to us through Crime Stoppers, and it can come through anonymously as well.
Okay, so that's a great option if someone's not comfortable identifying themselves. Okay, right. Excellent. Thank you so much. We have moved a lot in Nova Scotia, in Halifax. I'm so happy to hear it. These things certainly, and I'm dating myself, but this has just been a way of life for all of us who have been born and raised and living here and coming here. So thank you so much. Sharon, hello.
Hello.
So Sharon, welcome.
Thank you.
As we were just checking in, you showed me your well-worn criminal code, and I think that that's something that folks would like to see, because until you did that, I didn't realize how well used it is, and that's just each year copy.
Yes.
So
every year we get the criminal code and I destroy it before the year is up.
Okay, well, that just tells you how much research and thought goes into the process that you undertake. So tell us, what is it like to prosecute a hate crime in Nova Scotia? How is this restrictive or changing as awareness and capacity increase, as our culture shifts? What are you thinking about and learning?
Well, I'm going to start from exactly where we were talking about, which is the criminal code. I'm going to show you this isn't actually this year's criminal code, but this is a COVID year and it's intact. And this is a non-COVID year. So as a Crown Attorney, I am constantly turning to the criminal code to find answers. It actually irritates some of my colleagues. They say, put it down, don't open it. I don't want to know what's in the code. I want to know what you think, which is kind of an abnormal thing for me sometimes, because I'm so used to, what does the law say? What does the code say? What does the Canada Evidence Act say? And the thing about hate crime is you don't find the answers in here. You find some of them, but there's a lot of extra layers that you do not find in here.
Mhm.
So I want to mention too, because I've mentioned the code, and as a lawyer, I feel like I have to mention the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Yes.
Because all laws must comply with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It prevails over all of our laws, and hate crime is tied very closely to the Charter. So as a Crown, I don't create the law, but I do go before the court, and the courts have to apply, and I do as well, and interpret the laws within it. We take the laws that's provided to us unless it's determined unconstitutional or non-charter compliant.
Mhm.
And then we assess whether or not the evidence that we are provided supports a charge on a realistic prospect of conviction standard. That's the Crown's standard for review. If there is not a realistic prospect of conviction, regardless of how I may feel about something,
Yes.
I cannot prosecute a charge. So I always give the analogy of a hurdle that you're jumping over when you're going through the different stages of a court process. A police officer standard is reasonable and probable grounds. Let's just say that hurdle is there. A Crown's hurdle is realistic prospect of conviction, which is here. The court standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, which is here. Now I'm using my screen as a frame of reference. I'm not sure if that's showing on yours in the
Thank you.
same
It's
way.
very helpful. Yes. Thank you.
So there's different standards of review that happen as a matter moves through the system. So within the criminal code, there are specific provisions around hate crime. And I'm actually going to take what Detective Constable Poitier said a step further. So he mentioned hate incidents and hate crimes. So hate crimes are actually different in different forms. You can have, I think, and I don't want to put words in Detective Constable Poitier's mouth, but I think you have hate crime, which could be, for example, if you had, this isn't the word I would use for hate crime, but just kind of putting it into one classification is you could have hate crime, which might be, for example, an assault, but it's motivated by hate. The very specific hate crimes within the criminal code include advocating genocide under section 318, public incitement of hate and promotion of hate under section 319. There's certain forms of mischief under 434.1, and there's hate-based aggravating factors under 718.2. So if someone committed an assault, it doesn't charge as a 319 all the time. It could charge as a 266, but become an aggravating factor. Sorry, I work with numbers all of the time. I know that could be quite dense, but some people are interested, so I want to make sure they can, that's publicly accessible information. People can look up those provisions. Normally, I would want to talk ad nauseum about all of those sections, but they're dense. They have very specific case law attached to them, and I'm going to try to answer your question that you actually asked me, as opposed to do exactly what I want to do. So, there's been a lot of advancement nationally on the issue of hate crime. And this is so important because I look to cases to figure out, I look to cases before the cases in front of me to say, how do I apply this? What do I do with this issue? What's the evidentiary rule on that? And there has historically been very, and I'm going to say very little, but I'd say that's relatively speaking, very little case law on hate crime. So what has happened in the last, I'd say 2 years, is nationally there's more connection. So I wouldn't say I was bugging Ontario, because Ontario was always welcome arms to Nova Scotia, where I was calling their specific divisions saying, what about this? What are your thoughts on that? And I felt like I was bugging them, but they always were so welcoming to the questions that I would ask. And now BC has become the same. They have specific divisions. I am a generalist Crown. I am a trial Crown. I run everything from summary offense tickets to first-degree murders to hate crimes. So I am not a specific division of hate crime. I've just had the opportunity of growth to work through some very difficult hate crime files. And I see Craig smiled because he was with me as I worked through them. So, so again, I'm going to mention this because I know it's a bit dense and maybe not everyone's interested, but the Canadian Race Relations Foundation and co-chair of the National Hate Crime Task Force has recently released a research tool that makes accessible hate crime law that was previously unavailable. That's very helpful to legal professionals across the country. And then there's also search tools available on Handling. So I want to also go back to another point that Detective Constable Poitier raised. And I'm doing so in the context of reining myself in from talking about those provisions to extensive.
Oh, we're interested, and I wish we had more time.
I have too many pages of notes for the time that I have. The past the hate crime incidences. This is actually, I heard this for the first time today. I didn't actually know that was happening. And I actually think that's incredibly useful because under the hate crime provision of 319, it's willful promotion. So you can build a case by working on that mental element to say, this was not someone who accidentally did this, or this wasn't someone who had bad judgment. Look at the history here. Now, you do get into evidentiary rules around that, but it's helpful to know at the very beginning if someone has 15 hate incidences, where a file should probably go in its investigation. And so I'm very impressed that Halifax Regional Police is doing that. It is a step in the right direction. And when we say hate crime numbers are up, I actually personally believe hate crime's not up, hate crime numbers are up. So it's a reflection of how we're responding to it today that we were not doing before. So my personal views around prosecuting a hate crime are my personal views. So I'm going to speak where I'm at in my thought processes at this time, which are constantly evolving. I acknowledge that I come from a privileged background and I do not live the lived experiences of others, particularly those that are most targeted by hate crime. I know I'm stating the obvious. I think it's important for all those responding to hate-based crime, as a police, justice system participant, all elements, that you be mindful of the lived experience of a victim, the lived experience of a victimized person and community may be different from your own. If we're not listening with a wide angle and responding and adapting, we do great harm regardless of our best intentions. I think you have to be humble, regardless how brilliant you might have been in law school or what achievements you have acquired in your work. When you fail, you must acknowledge where you went wrong and try to improve. You must keep your eyes open to improvement. This is not just about being the smartest in the room. It is about seeking justice on a very complex issue, and one that you are probably not the expert in the room on when it comes to actually living as a person, community, or group impacted by hate crime. As Dr. Saney said, there are provisions within the code that require the approval of the Attorney General connected with hate crime. That's rare. Most sections of the criminal code, any officer can lay the charge. Look at the size of it. Hate crime is that much space. It's actually maybe 3 pages of that. So what happens if, for example, Detective Constable Poitier laid a charge, and I don't work in his jurisdiction, but he can't lay the charge of hate crime for for promotion. He can lay incitement, but he can't lay promotion. And then genocide, he can't lay. All the other charges, if it's assault or mischief, he can lay. So that would come to me as the Crown. And what I do is I have to write up an internal memo for I'm going to say AG for the second, not that I'm just being dismissive of the AG, but we actually have a little bit of a different process in Nova Scotia. And I have to seek approval. So the reason why I did this for AG is I wanted to come back to it. In Nova Scotia, we are an independent public prosecution service, which means we're at arm's length from the government. That was as a result of one of the recommendations from the Donald Marshall inquiry. So we are independent, and so our charges that require Attorney General approval are actually signed by the Director of the Public Prosecution Service. Okay, so I know I only have 4 minutes left. I did this last night and it took me 10 minutes and I'm not even close to finishing.
All good.
So when police want the assistance of a Crown in an investigation, they can ask. We do not compel or dictate how an investigation proceeds, as it's solely within the jurisdiction of the police, but we can assist when asked. Personally, I wish that Crown attorneys were contacted as soon as possible on hate crimes that are 318 or 319, in particular, because of the complexities associated with those. The investigation of those charges is very complex. It involves issues that may not pop out at you. I can tell you, and again, this is my personal view, having someone to consult with on some of those nuances associated with hate-based crime is a benefit. I fortunately had Craig Upshaw at the time I was working on a file, and just to speak to the level of what's the word? Compassion for this issue is Craig was not a police officer in my jurisdiction. He was in Halifax Regional. He sought approval to come down to rural Nova Scotia to assist on a file that's adding to his workload. It's adding to his day. And he was in constant contact with me. He answered all of my questions, allowed me to be not the smartest person in the room, while being kind. So those connections are really, really helpful. I'm going to cut out a whole pile of what I was going to talk about in terms of the actual kind of nitty-gritty of prosecuting a hate crime or hate-based crime. I want to just speak about what you mentioned, Gola, about trust. It's really complicated to be in a system that has either directly or systemically been racist to certain portions of our society. When I take a file that there's a victim or someone's been victimized by crime, they're putting trust in me. So someone who's lost a loved one, somebody who's been impacted by sexual assault, they trust me. So when I'm working with someone or a community that's been impacted by hate crime, and there's that underlying element as to why there would not be trust, how can I say, trust me? And I don't know what the answers are other than having discussions like this and challenging systems, challenging decisions. I'm going to cut right down to the last line of what I was going to say. Our work requires, as Crown attorneys, that we try to prevent errors. This isn't looking at a book, which is tattered and torn from use, but to see the unseen. I cannot settle in and not challenge myself to prevent harm. My job is to serve Nova Scotians. That is how we uphold the rule of law, which I know to some is just a phrase, but it's the core of our Canadian identity. We have to value it. We have to challenge ourselves. And much as the case was in science, when I have a science degree, we would always say, well, you don't know the truth. You'll never find the truth. But you never stop looking for the truth. You keep researching, you keep questioning, you keep advancing. It would be a very sad state of affairs if we stopped trying to reach the ideals associated with what is the concept of law, which means we have to have these challenging discussions. So shockingly, I thought I was going to be the shortest, but I'm cutting about 3 pages of my work out.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Sharon. Very, very helpful. And I think it brings us to a wonderful place. I think what I've heard in through all of you, and I know Dr. Saney had to leave early, is we're asking people to think differently, to act differently, to question differently. And internally, you know, with a sense of cultural humility, to examine our biases, but we're also recognizing the systemic and historical impacts. And I think I also don't have the answer as well, Sharon. I don't think any of us do, other than keeping the dialogue going and learning together, because that's how we will at least approach a basic understanding. Thank you so much. With that, I believe we have some questions that folks at home have posted. And Jeff, would you like to?
Yeah, if you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom, Gola, it may be easier for you to read the text from the
Let
screen.
me see. Yes, definitely. Okay, so this is the Q&A. Okay, thank you.
A
So,
individual in a municipality wondering about their influence on the RCMP to have this sort of training. If you want to read that one.
yes, so this is a message from Stephanie. And this is the first one. I'm the equity lead in my municipality. What leverage, control, influence do we have with the RCMP? We contract to ensure they are properly trained and implementing progressive anti-hate practices, especially in a rural and conservative area. The only influence I know of is our RCMP advisory committee, which did an overhaul somewhat recently. I'm not yet aware of their conclusions or the actions coming from the overview. Any thoughts on this? Leverage, control, and influence. Very big word.
I can't weigh in on leverage, control, and influence, but I will say that the RCMP do have a recently appointed hate crime coordinator within H Division for Nova Scotia. It's a new position, and it's Corporal Fedma who is overseeing it, and it's a large task because he has a different task than we do. We work. Craig and I worked in a jurisdiction where we could go visit all of our people. Anybody that called in a complaint, we could get to. So he has a different way that he has to deal with it, and but it is a position that's in place. As far as leverage, control, and influence, I can't speak on that. I don't know how that would ever work, other than liaising with your MLAs or your counselors in your area to put back on the RCMP whatever concerns you might have. But I just wanted to bring that to light. There is a hate crime coordinator recently appointed to H Division in Nova Scotia.
Thank you. That's
So
very.
if I could just touch on that briefly, I know one of the biggest things we push with this is a police board, advisory board, which you had mentioned. That's where you start putting that pressure on there to make sure all your police agencies, some places have RCMP and a municipality police force. The pressure needs to be on both sides to be trained. But I am aware that the RCMP, when I sit on the Canadian Race Relations Federation board, this was in conjunction with the RCMP. So this is all the experts got together on this board, and we're trying to create a process in a program, in a training program that goes straight across Canada, so everybody starts having the same type of training. That's what we're looking at there. That's what we're trying to do. And I know that's still in play. I know Halifax is still involved in it. I think the Superintendent Boone was attending the last sessions there. So the RCMP are seriously looking at it as well. And I know that they've started training some of their members here. In regards to even the RCMP, I've been called in when I was in the unit. I'm not sure Jeff still called regular basis since this is the hate member got in place for the RCMP. But before that, I was actually speaking to RCMP members investigating these files and overseeing some of it. So we're still working with the RCMP in some capacity, such as Sackville, Hore Harbor, and whatnot. They still come into us to see them. So
Yes. Thank you. We have another question from Nicholas. Nicholas asks, what about online videos or comments? So I guess this would be YouTube comments, Facebook comments, CBC comments? What's your position or thought on that?
Yeah, so I would say, without getting into specifics about individual like files or anything like that, if somebody felt that there was something online that reached a level of hatred, I would implore them to reach out to their Halifax Police or the local municipality, the RCMP, bring it to their attention, and let them have a look at it to see what can be done, if anything. Online it's not easy to comment one way or the other. There's a lot of things that go into it, but like in a lot of the hate motivated offenses, online, if there's something that somebody sees there that they feel it might reach that level of hatred, I would say file the complaint, bring it to the police, and let us and the Crown's office have a look at it and see if it gets there.
Okay, thank you.
And understanding that when it comes to online stuff, they got to realize that if it's a private conversation, that kind of gets into where Sharon was going with the Charter of Freedom of Speech, etc. If it's a private conversation where you know exactly what you're getting invited into, and if you decide to accept that, there's not a whole lot we can do. But if it's open online, we can use it. But if it's an invite, if it's private, it's marked this, and that person invited you and you went and you knew what it was, there's not a whole lot we can do that because you knew what you were stepping into when you went there. So they understand that if you're searching for it, it doesn't really help us police file. If you start digging, trying to build a file for us, sometimes that hurts our file we're trying to build in regards to hatred.
It's very interesting. Thank you. Question from Suzanne. Can bystanders report hate incidents? For example, if you see or hear something in a public setting towards someone else and you're not sure if the victim reported, can a bystander call and let you know?
Yeah, that would be no different than a car accident. If you see a car accident and you're not sure if the people in the vehicle have called or not, then you would call in and report that car accident to the police. I look at it the same way. If you see an incident taking place and you're concerned and you feel the police should be aware of it, in this case, a hate motivated offense. So if you see one person targeting another person, there's a whole lot of barriers that person that's being targeted might not call the police for. And if you're able to provide us with the information of what you saw and you're going to be an independent witness for us and be able to help us, then I would implore that person to call the police and file the complaint.
So interesting. It really requires that we shift our thinking about these as members of the public, right? We're used to making the calls if we see property damage, if we see something happening. But when it comes to hate, it's kind of like, do we intervene or do we not intervene? Is there a place to intervene? It sounds like there is.
There is, and it can be uncomfortable for a lot of people because a lot of people will have dealt with that hatred or racism themselves, and they might not want to interject, or they might. But if it's simply a case of, can I help by placing a call to the police? Yes, you can. We will gladly take the information, and that person might be the only call that we get. So it's better for us to have the information and see how we can reach out and see what we can help with.
And data matters when we're trying to build the story of what's happening in our communities. Yes.
It does, right? But it might be what gets us to the victim to provide that help and support that Craig was talking about before, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much. We have a number of other questions, but I don't think we'll get to them today. But rest assured that this is just the beginning of a conversation I hope that we can be involved in together in the coming year and going forward. Isaac, I noticed that you're back, and I'd like to, if you're able to join us and answer a final question. Hello.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I'm in a car.
It's all
unexpectedly, I have to go pick up my little one. Okay, because mom's stranded. Okay. So you might get to see the one who was the center, the protagonist of this whole issue.
Okay, this is great. I'm glad. So you mentioned earlier that today marks 5 years since the sentencing in your case. We've talked today and explored some changes that have happened since then. As you reflect now at this time, what more needs to change for people to feel safe?
Well, I think we need to challenge the discourse that's happened. I know we had a discussion about language and so forth. I even say symbols. I was involved a few years ago before the case with my daughter Asha with dealing with the Confederacy flag, which I think is one of the clear symbols of hatred and racial discrimination and so forth. I think one, it's also, education. As an educator, as someone who operates in a university environment, I think it's important for people to understand these situations, to understand where this discourse is coming from. This anti-immigrant, anti-Black, anti-Indigenous discourse that's emerged. And I think there's a backlash that's happening in response to the Idle No More movement, the Truth and Reconciliation, the Black Lives Matter, and the George Floyd rebellion. I think it's important for people, for us to challenge this kind of discourse that emerges, like seek scapegoats to sort of have an easy explanation for the societal problems that exist, or challenges, economic challenges. And immigrants and people of color, and the most subordinate groups have often been the most vulnerable, right, to this sort of things. So fundamentally education, and fundamentally a state discourse to challenge some of the political discourse that's emerging from certain sectors that's become very anti-immigrant and others people, right? There's an othering that takes place, right? And there's this idea of Canadian values that emerges to exclude others, right? Okay, and I think it's important to challenge that and to recognize the problems that exist, right? In the fact that Canada is a colonial settler state, and this carries a profound historical weight that weighs like a nightmare on the brain of the living, to paraphrase a great political thinker.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Thank you. And with that, I think we will bring our panel to conclusion. I want to thank you all for what you shared today. I personally am leaving here with a more deeper understanding of the issue and more motivated to address this in the work that we do here. So I look forward to more conversation, deeper relationships with all of you in the interest of ensuring that all Nova Scotians are equal in dignity and right. I think we share the same goal. Thank you so much. Now, this recording will be available on the Commission's website within 24 hours. And if you haven't already, for those listening and for panel members, please check out the other events that we're hosting this week during Human Rights Week. You can access the schedule on our website as well. So with that, Jeff, any final words?
Nope, you've done it. Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay. Pleasure to talk to you all. We'll see you soon.